Awesome. Well, stage is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's 5 p.m. here in South Florida. So cheers to you all. I poured myself a beverage. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all our sponsors and everyone that has set this up. Looks pretty good. Also, thank you if you're on Discord. That way we can interact a little bit. So I'm going to talk about adversary emulation. I took a look at the schedule. Oh my gosh, what awesome talks we've had today. And the good thing about choosing adversary emulation is that there's a lot of things to talk about in 1 hour. So I'm not going to cover anything that was already covered in the past couple hours. So when I got invited to come speak at DerpCon, the first thing that came to my mind was derp.txt. And derp.txt has a fun story behind it. See, worked many years at a large financial doing various different forms of pen testing and created the red team and whatnot. But in this particular case, we were doing a product pen test. So before putting any product into production, we got to test it. And being a large global organization, that had a lot of weight. It was pretty much a free pen test for a lot of these vendors, and we would not pay them or purchase their product or put them in production until they fixed all high risk and higher vulnerabilities. So it's a cool place to be because people are actually fixing things because they wanted to, scale and have us as a client. But of course, we couldn't really talk about many of the vulnerabilities. So here, I'll just tell you what's a security appliance from a major vendor you probably know. We were doing this pen test, so it's supposed to be a white box pen test most of the time for these product tests, right? We want to be able to log on to the system and see what's going on. So for this one, they did not want to give us CLI access. Our engineers, so normally a vendor talks to engineers, the engineers couldn't convince them, the engineers themselves didn't have access to this, our engineers, not the vendors. And they pretty much said, we'll give you a restricted shell, and if you want access, you're gonna have to break out of it. And I don't know how a security vendor nowadays says this. This was a while ago. This was probably more than 5 years ago. I could finally talk about it. But you think challenge accepted, bring it on, security vendor. So what did I do? I assigned the top restricted shell escaper I know, and I think he's on, Doug Stillwell. Shout out to you. I know some of you know him, Net Wars champion, and he's been around. So gave this to him, like, hey, we got to get out of this, like, not even just for like testing purposes, just like, what is this vendor thinking? And how much money do they want after this? So if you've ever been in a restricted shell, you have to type help, right? You need to figure out what commands you have. So you start there, and then you start doing stuff. And I'm not going to go into that stuff because Doug actually has a blog post about this called Escaping Restricted Linux Shells that he goes a lot deeper into. The link is here. And yes, this is posted. Actually, I had a tweet going out and a LinkedIn going out right at 5 with the slides. So if you find me on Twitter, you have the slides there. Someone could copy and paste them if you want these references immediately. So first thing you do is figure out what commands you have and what you can do with these commands. So found one of the commands, bureau var, and typed echo. And this thing had code comments and things talking back to you being like, you didn't say the magic word. And I remember this. This is from Jurassic Park. This security vendor is trolling us. Not only did they not give us access or restricted in a restricted shell and saying you have to get it, they're actually putting code comments in this with, Jurassic Park quotes. And if you haven't seen Jurassic Park, the YouTube link for this particular scene is there, and you should probably watch it if you have nothing else to do. So long story short, Doug found a command that this was written in Ruby that would send an operating system command, and it allowed arguments. So in this case, and this is the first yellow up there, and yes, we compress this into like one screenshot that shows it. Obviously didn't, it wasn't this easy. This was just for demonstration purposes at this point. So was able to insert a semicolon and then execute other commands. So first thing he did was touch temp lapone, which is a file, then change the permissions on it, and then echoed into that file a command, in this case user mod. And then he looked at his ID and saw he was limited. Then he looked into sudo, who has, or what do I have, and what can I run as root? And lo and behold, you see TCP dump. Ding, ding, ding. If you have TCP dump, you can escape a shell, because if you use the -z command, it will actually execute a script for you. It's really created to go through when you're saving PCAP files, but it's actually a nice little way to exit. So he had created this, he got this executed, you run sudo again, I have access to everything, and then we ran sudo etc shadow just to prove we had access. Now's where the fun began. So what do you do next? Well, let's look at the bash history. So here is an example, again, using ampersand to execute another command, in this case, cat bash history. And you can see there some call outs through a proxy, obviously. Big enterprises have proxies. And then using private keys to go to a website, interesting. But then there you see on the bottom right, you see that derp.txt. See these derp.txt, like what could this possibly be? We have to look at it. And you know what derp.txt said? It said, it was the best of time. It was the derpest of time. And from now on, every time I see derp.txt, I think, or derp, I think of this particular test, which was a lot of fun. But wait, there's more. So remember, this vendor didn't really want us getting out, and Doug did because he's awesome. Well, we started looking around this appliance and we found a lot of stuff. We found a bunch of source code that they obviously did not want us to see. We also found more private keys, and we actually found some S3 bucket keys, both for dev and prod, right there in the code. And of course, this led to us obtaining their entire source code, closed source product, as I mentioned, and also all the customers. So very fun test that that we got to work on. And we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to say what the vendor was or who they are or anything. Obviously, this is fixed. I'm not dropping any O days here. But just, I heard derp and I'm like, oh my gosh, Doug, do you remember this? And, we went down memory lane, and fun little start here to break the ice. So, yeah, who am I? So I led the offensive security team at a large financial for the past 10 years. I say led because I actually just resigned. I'm going to be announcing what I'm doing next in exactly 1 month. So very excited about that. As I mentioned, being in financial, it's like the first rule of Fight Club. We couldn't talk about anything. We probably found like 30 to 40 like good, critical, or high risk O days that you probably patched, but couldn't really talk about it. Couldn't talk about how it was found. Couldn't like even link our names or our team names to it. So you kind of have to accept that. But it was a great time there. We were able to do some things to with the community. For instance, I was one of the founding members of MITRE's new Ingenuity Center. This is what is maintaining MITRE Attack evals, and doing a whole bunch of other projects that, while we sponsor them, they will end up being open source. So things that you will see if you follow MITRE. And I don't know if we're playing any drinking games every time we say attack, you take a drink, but there's a few of them. Also wrote a framework for doing some of this, what we're going to talk about today, adversary emulations and red teaming. I'm a SAN certified instructor and author of a 2-day red team course, Security 564. I'm a 2020 NSI Technologist Fellow and ISSA Fellow. I was a co-author and voting group member of CVSS. We just released version 3.1. I'm sure you use that. And I wrote a book in my system admin days on Windows 7, an operating system no one should be running because it's end of life. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn. And like I said, if you want the slides right now, they are posted there. So what are we talking about? We're going to talk about adversary emulation and kind of defining it. I know that's the red team track. This is one type of red team exercise, right? Red teaming can be applied in a variety of different ways. I'm not going to go into those definitions. An adversary emulation could really start from doing a threat-led penetration test to a blind red team to a non-blind purple team type exercise. The top here that I have going from vulnerability scanning to assessment to pen testing, that's how we matured and that's how I had the privilege of introducing it to the organization I worked. Started as a vulnerability assessment analyst and then introduced penetration testing, which is actually exploiting vulnerabilities on production systems, doing a lot of transactions a day. So that was fun. Then introduced red team, which was really going after the people, the process, and the technology. Then after a few blind red team engagements, we figured we should work with the blue team a little more. These adversary emulations take a long time, especially if you do the full end-to-end assessment. So if you start all the way on the internet with no access and go all the way through, and I know Tim Medine did an awesome talk. I'm sure it was awesome this time. I didn't catch it, but I've caught it before on assumed breach, and an awesome and very valuable type of pen test to do. Not taking credit from there for doing that. All of these are different. At the end of the day, any of these that you do, you need to bring value to the business. So us as red teamers and technical, sometimes we just want to win. We just want to get in, own stuff, and call it a day and make fun of them at DerpCon talks when we escape their shells. But that's not really the end goal, right? The end goal is always to bring business value. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. I'm going to focus on mostly the attack infrastructure side, command and control and things like that, because it's what hasn't been talked about too much this conference. So doing an end-to-end assessment, main differentiators, as I mentioned, from a pen test is that you're testing the defenders, not the defenses, right? And there's a difference. One is prevention, right? In a pen test, most of the time you're looking for vulnerabilities and you exploit those vulnerabilities. In this, you're actually going and testing people, process, and technology. You're going to want to measure them and improve them. And another thing that we found, especially in financials, so if any of you are in financials, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We are regulated by like every single person and their mother and father and family members. So, and they don't really know much about this. That's why I really push for using correct terminology. And they've limited a lot of things. So a pen test now, for example, PCI DSS, right? If you look at pen tests, it's very scoped down only to a certain environment, which it's not really what we wanted to do when we were doing pen testing. So this is an adversary emulation, is a full end-to-end from outside all the way through getting the objective. Most of the time, this is blind. Everything I'm going to talk about, I'm going to assume it's blind red team. You can do announced, which would really make it more of a purple team, but I'm not going to dive too much into that. Most of the steps are similar. I'll actually differentiate some of them. And at the end of the day, you want to determine what works, what TTPs. So you're really evolving from what we did in vulnerabilities, which are CVEs, common vulnerabilities and exposures, to tactics, techniques, and procedures, right? And I'm sure by this time everyone knows what those are. So things that we want to do that we generally don't do in other types of ethical hack assessments or offensive security assessments is measure the effectiveness of the people, process, and technology. So we're going to be phishing, but not for awareness training. And I know most of you just got the previous one, right? So phishing obviously works quite well, especially the targeted phishing where you go after one particular person. So there you're testing the people. Once you get that initial access, then you as a red team are taking good notes and you know what is happening, how long your connection is staying up, how long it's taking you to move laterally from one system to another. And you time all of this because you take good notes and good logs. And by timing all of this, we get metrics that later on I'll talk about actually showing value for doing this, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to show business value. If not, you're just going in and pwning stuff for no reason. So other metrics are how long it took them to identify, and them being the blue team, I'm talking from a red team perspective here. How long it took them to eradicate. Did they follow their process? Did the SOC level 1, from the time they saw that alert, trigger and escalate to their level 2 or whatever process they have? Did that go to the incident handling team? Did incident response trigger? Did forensics start happening? Did they correlate all these events together to notice that it is an adversary that's likely to attack them? Another one is to test assumptions. And this is a big one, real differentiator between red team and some other assessments is we test assumptions, right? We are going to actually verify that things are working, right? And you hear this all the time, especially from senior management saying like, oh, that attack won't happen here because we applied our patches, right? Tell that to Maersk, who had that NotPetya incident costing millions and millions of dollars, right? They thought, and their senior management was under the impression things were okay, and obviously we saw that wasn't the case. Or we have outbound DLP. No one would ever be able to steal 2 gigabytes of data without us noticing, right? You could tell that to Sony, right? That lost a whole bunch of movies and whatnot, right? And I'm not doing this to call people out, just doing this because those are assumptions that senior management had and accepted at some point and no longer do. And then of course the newest one, after the assassination of Soleimani in Iran, started 2020 off with a bang. Thanks about thank you 2020. The main question we were getting was, what can Iran do? What can Iranian threat actors do to us? And the good thing was that we had tested and emulated some of these Iranian threat actors. We knew what TTPs they had. We didn't have to do an adversary emulation. We actually just had to come up with metrics and reports to show where we had gaps and where we should focus on because of this new adversary. And then the last one is to train and improve the blue team. I think it was Ryan O'Hara that said the only wrong way to do red teaming is to ignore the blue team. So, and that's true, right? Like that's the point of red teaming, is to train and to work with the blue team, right? And I put up here, a sparring partner. I know a lot of you do martial arts, are interested in various forms of it, and it's very similar, right? You train, you spar, you have a sparring partner that you get along with, right? You're not going to hurt them or cause damage, but every time you test and you train, you improve. And it's not just the blue team improving. By the blue team improving, that means the red team has to improve. So you stay challenged. That's really the only way to do retention nowadays, is to keep your folks challenged. There's many challenges out there, so keep them focused on the red team stuff. The next one is frameworks and methodologies. I know everyone hates talking about this stuff, but we have to. For example, the cyber kill chain. I think we got a drink because I said kill chain. Everyone hates it, right? But you know what the cyber kill chain did? It got a lot of senior non-technical people to understand how an attack worked. And that made your job easier because you didn't have to explain it. And, frankly, most of us are really bad at explaining technical things. And that gained us a lot. So, yeah, we'll talk bad about it because it's only 7 steps. And, oh, my gosh, what do you do between command and control and action on objectives? You have the entire MITRE attack kill chain in there. But it was a start from when it was introduced. So, I'm not going to hate on it that much. Shout out to Paul Poles with the Unified Cyber Kill Chain. I'll talk about that shortly. And then, of course, what we do in Adversary Emulations is perform TTPs that are mapped to it. And then I mentioned I am in the financial space, was for 10 years, and every one of these folks regulated me and had a red team type adversary emulation, like what I'm going to discuss here, that we had to do. So the Bank of England is probably one of the first ones with CBEST, the European Central Bank with Tiber EU, and all these frameworks are public, right? I'm not saying anything that's not public. Singapore came out with their adversary attack simulation exercise framework, G7, etc. And these actually take time. Like we tried to do these every quarter, and it just wasn't feasible. You can't do a full end-to-end based on all the planning and everything we have to do every quarter. So if you're in 5 of these countries, then all of a sudden you can't do them. So we worked, and I was a co-author with other folks in Global Financials as part of the Global Financial Markets Association, and we created a framework for the regulatory use of pen testing and red teaming in financial services that covered all the test cases there. And by doing this one test, you can meet the regulations of all of them. And of course, XKCD for that. So one of the frameworks is MITRE ATT&CK. I put this in just so you all drink if you're playing a drinking game. I think everyone knows what this is, and if not, then I don't know what we've talked about in the past day or so, or a couple of years. MITRE ATT&CK, adversary tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. We'll say that it is a common knowledge. It has allowed cyber threat intelligence folks to give red team and blue team data in a language that all of us understand. And it's allowed the red team to talk to cyber threat intelligence and to blue team in a language that they understand. So it is a common language. The top row, of course, being the tactics. That's the overall goal that the attacker wants. That's what closely maps to the kill chain. And then each one of these is a technique. One technique can have multiple procedures. And of course, now we're going to get sub-techniques. So if you don't know about MITRE ATT&CK, you definitely should check it out. I'm not going to talk about that anymore. So a framework for doing this, if you're doing a full-on adversary emulation, blind, really emulating an adversary through objective, you need a plan. And I was actually speaking with someone, I don't know if I'm allowed to name them, on Twitter. I saw an awesome CTFer, met multiple times net wars champion that I met just at an event, was saying, hey, we want to bring red teaming in, but like, how do I get management to buy in? And I had to think about that because it's obviously not an answer, definitely not an answer that you can do in Twitter. But one of the things you need is a framework and a methodology. You have to have a plan. And this is actually modeled on the GFMA framework that we wrote. It's also something you'll see in some of the other ones. In this case, we'll start with threat intelligence. So you have a team that actually does threat intelligence. I'll cover that shortly. For your particular organization, right? And the keyword is intelligence, right? I'm not talking about data, I'm not talking about information, I'm talking about actual intelligence, like bringing all that and analyzing it and creating something for a target organization. From there, we understand the particular adversaries are likely attack. Then we create a plan around our understanding, because you're not going to be able to do everything, right? Like if you want to do a ransomware attack, I doubt that putting on there that you're going to encrypt all the systems in the target environment will fly. That's how you don't get management buy-in. So you come up with a plan, then you test, which I'm not going to cover much of at all in today because all the other speakers kind of talked about all of this. And then closure, I will focus on that part, which is bringing value. And that's all, like the planning and the closure is what management actually cares about. We care about the testing, right? The cyber threat folks care about that, but we need to care about all of them. So TTPs, this is the hard way. So this I originally saw in a presentation from Katie Nichols, who was over at MITRE, is now at Red Canary. And she was showing how you can actually read a threat intelligence report, which we all should be doing, and extract information and map it back to MITRE ATT&CK. So it does take knowledge of MITRE ATT&CK, and of course you have to read, but if you don't like to read, then you're in the wrong business, right? So we read cyber threat intelligence, and just here, for example, the first line has 3 different types of threat intelligence. It has auto IT, which is a software, link back to MITRE ATT&CK. It has PowerShell, which is a technique, and it has an IP address, which doesn't really matter for us, but that would matter for, say, a SOC analyst that wants to see if any communication's there. So you actually have to go through all this stuff and pull information. Now, what matters to us, and if you're still playing this drinking game, there's a pyramid of pain. Cheers for that one. We care about the top. We care about emulating the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Why? Because most of the others you can't really emulate. Tools, maybe. We'll cover the C2 matrix shortly. You can use some of the tools that the adversary was using. But domain names, are you gonna acquire some domain name that was used by an adversary or IP address or create exactly the same hash value? Probably not. So just as defenders use the pyramid of pain, we like to focus on TTPs. And of course, if you don't want to read everything, then you can use Attack Navigator, which is another MITRE product. It is free and dynamic on GitHub. This is actually a screenshot of the dynamic one. You can clone it and run it internally if you'd like, because you can assign scores, you can highlight. In this case, I only selected APT33, which is an Iranian threat actor, and the TTPs that we have threat intel for. So this is very quick, an easy way of doing threat intel. As you mature, you'll probably be doing it the harder way. And then from there, we have planning. And planning for a blind test is probably what takes the most time. A lot of people don't talk about this. Like, I see red teamers talking a lot about actually doing some of these TTPs, but no one really talks about the actual planning and like all the hard work we had to do to actually get approval to do it. So again, I'm covering what hasn't been covered yet. One of the first things you need is trusted agents. This is often called a white team or a white cell. Yes, we took that from military terms, just like we took red teaming. And this is a limited number of people that have knowledge of the exercise. So you need people to know about it, but you can't have the actual players knowing about it, right? So for example, the head of the Security Operations Center needs to know about this because they're going to be seeing this. The head of risk probably should know about this, but the players, the actual SOC analysts, the incident responders, they shouldn't. Why? Because when someone knows that it's an exercise or a test, their behavior changes. And if their behavior changes, then those metrics you're taking are no longer accurate. And if you don't have accurate metrics, then what are you showing the board or the senior management? Your value diminishes. And again, it's all about providing business value. So you want people that have daily roles and know what's going on. Probably the head of incident response, head of SOC, the CISO, head of IT, because you're going to be touching those. And for instance, the risk people. Like, we had one where a regulator almost got called halfway across the world because they heard about this. They had, I think, a 72-hour disclosure plan. They were not aware that this was happening, yet they were hearing about the incident following standard procedures, and they were about to call and let a regulator know until they escalated to their boss, let them know, and we stopped it. Lessons learned. Then rules of engagement. Everything needs to have rules of engagement. Sometimes you hear, oh, red team doesn't have rules. That's BS. Of course you have rules. You have some rules, but also the blue team has rules. So blue teams need to know that even if there is an exercise, whether it's a regulatory one or an internal red team or whatnot, they need to keep and carry out their activity as if it was a real incident. You also don't want to have exercise fatigue or incident fatigue. So that's something else to consider. And then, of course, red team has rules. There's a great GitHub post on ethics in red team, especially around social engineering. Quite interesting. Definitely read those. And don't cause business impact, right? One of the main things you want to do is always communicate the actions. So what we would do is we'd have the red team lead that would know everything the red team was doing, was getting briefs all day long. They would go and talk to the other trusted agents, but not bring the information back, right? That's why they're called trusted agents. And then attack infrastructure. I think that's what we haven't talked too much about in this conference. And it's important. It's probably where the red team spends a lot of time, is creating that external internet infrastructure to be able to get in, stay in, and achieve the objective. So there's many things to consider here. One is to choose and procure an external hosting provider that will allow you to do this. I generally suggest going with cloud hosts, because getting blocked and getting new IPs are both quick. So if you get burned, some C2 gets caught, a redirector gets caught, you can create a new one or change its IP very quickly. And no organization is going to block all of Amazon or all of Google or all of Microsoft Azure or etc. One of my favorites, I always get asked what I like. I like DigitalOcean. Why? I don't know. We just used it and like it more than Linode. I don't know. Not Namecheap, because they don't have good OPSEC and will leak information about you. Learn that one from experience as well. You need domain names, right? Most organizations, if they're mature enough to do red teaming, they are probably blocking IP addresses outbound, right? Like, who today just allows you accessing an IP from an end user subnet inside of an internal network, right? Most people don't. So you need to buy a domain. And then if you want any sort of security, you want that to be over HTTPS. Even when you're doing social engineering, we've had better success when we do a credential theft site that has a TLS certificate over one that does not. Because even though users fell for the fish, they clicked on it, when they saw that you weren't hosting that credential theft site over HTTPS, they didn't provide their passwords. So it's interesting, always generate domain certificates. And then you need to set up mail servers. If you're going to send these out, just had a whole talk on this, right? You have to set that up. If you're going to have your own mail servers, if you're going to use a provider, then set up those accounts. And if you're going to set up credential theft sites, set those up as well. Then you're going to have to create some sort of reputation, right? Most domains that you buy nowadays have some reputation built in, and some organizations don't allow that. Like the typical one is pornography, right? Most organizations block that. That's because that domain has been categorized by a number of different vendors as being porn. So it's blocked. What you want to do is categorize on something that will not be blocked. Thoughts around that? Something business related, financial related, healthcare related, those are generally not blocked. And then you need to set up your C2 infrastructure. You want to have a short haul and a long haul command and control infrastructure. A long haul is for when you get burned. A long haul will only call back to your C2 server, not often at all, like maybe once a day, once every few days, at a big pattern, not at an interval. Your short haul is what you will use to interact on a day-to-day with the host. You might do this once every minute for that internal system that you've compromised to call out. Then you need to configure these C2s. A lot of them allow what's called custom profiles. A lot of them allow for domain fronting. Those kind of things you actually need to configure. Things like changing the user agent is something people are looking at quite a bit. Looking at the JA3 tags, so something you can change. And then actually test your external C2. On top of all of that, you need operational security. You don't want to get caught. You don't want the blue team to just look at you and be like, oh, this is definitely red team, or to hack someone else, right? You want to have whitelisting and ACLs in place that only allow your target organization to connect to your C2. And then of course, you connecting to your infrastructure, you need controls there, right? Like everything we've preached forever, like actually do that when it's your turn to set up infrastructure, right? So far, you've found an adversary that has the opportunity, intent, and capability to attack this target organization. You chose them, you chose tactics, techniques, and procedures, and now you're setting all this up. Well, the next step is to actually figure out what command and control framework you're going to use. And that's where the C2 matrix comes in. So the C2 matrix is a matrix of command and control frameworks for red teamers. It was originally created like that. It started when Empire and the developers of Empire, and thank you to all those original developers, Empire is awesome, said that it was end of life. And I started asking around, and a few of us just started talking about this. I know some of the people listening in here, Marcello was talking about this, and talked to Bryce and Bort about this at DerpCon, and there was no one answer for what C2 to use. We got like 8 different answers, some I hadn't even heard of. So started looking into this and documenting them in a spreadsheet, because I'm a manager and that's what we do. We use spreadsheets. And then started figuring out what capabilities each of these have. Because if you're going to emulate a certain adversary, then you just need to pick the C2 that can do most of those TTPs, or maybe 1 or 2 C2s that can do most of those TTPs. You don't want to have to use 8 of these, right? So there's no right or wrong answer. It allows you to find the ideal one. And the original launch was in November, and we had a little questionnaire there for that. Since then, the industry feedback has been awesome. I really appreciate, we all appreciate the contributions, right? And it's open for anyone, feedback, contributions, it's fully open source. It's all the information is out there. I think we're up to like 1,600 Twitter followers, which I think is awesome for like 5 months. And yeah, I'd like to show you that now. Do we want to get some questions in while I switch?
Yeah, sure, if you want. Absolutely. I was going to wait until the Q&A section, but we can definitely get rid of some of these. Okay, so from Nemesis, I'm sorry, that's not how you pronounce that. Would it be fair that a 24-hour pen test, would it be fair to say that a 24-hour pen test is really more of a vulnerability assessment, limited opportunity for social engineering?
Yeah, it all depends on the scope. But 24 hours, I guess I didn't talk about this, so great opportunity. Most of these adversary emulations have about 3-month timeline because of the planning, the preparation. Like some of the things that we have to prep as red team takes, days, weeks, things that we count in days and weeks. It's just like the planning does. And then the actual test, if you're emulating an APT, that P stands for persistence or persistent, which means that, yeah, it's gonna take a little bit of time to do. So yeah, 24-hour pen test. I'd figure out the scope. I'd ask, am I even allowed to exploit? And that's the thing. I mean, the people asking these things don't really understand the definitions. Just recently, I saw someone ask for a red team engagement, and really they wanted a vulnerability assessment. Like they didn't even want exploitation. So yeah.
Awesome. And
I'll let you cue those up. Sorry, I caught you out. Not prepared for that one as I was switching. So I have the c2matrix.com up on here. On this, it's a site, right? And it has a few things up on the top. It has an about. It has an ask, which this is the questionnaire. You can go through and answer questions like, do you need a command and control that supports multiple users? So that team in red, yeah, I need multiple users, and you see it will filter out those. And then as you go through, you say, what channels do you want to call back on? Well, I want HTTP and maybe DNS, right? And then you see it really limits down the options. We have documentation, which is what we recently launched. This is a how-to page on all the things that you can do with the C2 matrix, like setting up a lab. It covers the C2 matrix eval lab, which is how we tested these. So any contributor, I think like Tim Medine's on here. I know he contributed to one, etc. We want to test something consistent. So this is the lab environment that you can set up, and we talk through how to actually set that up. We run things like Sysmon and Wireshark and whatnot to see. And then you have these how-tos for various different ones. Of course, I'm going to talk about Silent Trinity because of you, Marcello. And thank you to all the developers for everything you've done here. So we have various different information on how to install, how to run, how to deploy agents, and then resources. The newest one is around detection, how to detect beacons, how to detect JA3 hashes, which is how TLS does its initial handshake. And there's also, if you want to play with these, the Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition. So Sure, most of you have heard of SANS, right? One of the best training platforms, and I do teach for them, so a little biased on that one. But they have the Slingshot, which is a virtual machine that's free and it has a whole bunch of pen test tools. Well, we worked with them to release the SANS Slingshot C2 Matrix Edition, which has a whole bunch of C2s already pre-installed. See, getting all these C2s to work on one system was actually quite hard. I don't know if anyone's tried it. Most people just like build a system and put one C2 on it, but it's tough. And like I said, this one has Silent Trinity, so you can download that. And it also has Vector, which I'm going to talk about shortly. There's a feedback form. Give us feedback. We really appreciate it. Also, follow us on Twitter, C2_matrix, and the information's on there. But really, the matrix is what I want to talk about. You click on the matrix, and it's a Google Sheet. And as you can see, it has a whole bunch of C2s. When we originally started talking about this at DerpCon, I think with Bryson, there was like 8. Then when we released, I think we had like 20. And now there's like 43 different command and control frameworks out there. You go through the top, you have more info about the C2 itself. So really, if you've just never heard of one and you want to check one out, you go there, you see the license, you see if it has a price, you get the GitHub, the developer's Twitter, and then you go through it. So just because we've got Marcello on here, I'm going to talk about Silent Trinity, if you'll allow me, sir, and thank you again for providing this. So if we look at Silent Trinity, for instance, and we just want to go across here, the person who evaluated, I believe this is Matt Toussaint, when it was evaluated, because a lot of these are under active development. So thank you for that as well, developers. And what version was evaluated, because from change of versions, various things could change. So this was evaluated in 4.6. It was implemented in binary. There's a how-to for it at on how-to.thec2matrix.com. It's available on Slingshot. It's also going to be available in Kali. Actually, I don't know if I told you this, Marcello. I've been working with the folks at Offensive Security, and the 2020.2 release is going to have, I gave them all the instructions and everything, and you're going to be able to get Silent Trinity on there.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I've been working with them. So then the language, the server was written on Python. The agents is what you deploy, written in Boolean. Then you have the UI. So this is actually a multi-user UI. We're seeing a lot of C2s going up to being multi-user because that's the team in red, right? It's UI that has an API, and then where you can build agents. So this, again, depends on your target environment. Are you attacking a Windows environment? Are you attacking Linux? Are you attacking Mac? Then the channels that you have. The most popular channel here, if like I just scroll up, you can see is HTTP. And this comes just from threat intel, right? Most of the C2s we see are coming from, are over HTTP. Then we see the key exchange. This is something for operational security. You don't want someone taking over your agent or someone connecting to your server and owning your server. So that's a good idea. Steganography, if it's proxy aware, if it allows domain fronting, all things that you should consider as a red teamer for setting up your command and control. So it's all there. The newest thing we've added is detection. As you can see, it's only one row. Yes, I have a red team background. So any blue teamers that want to contribute, please do. We definitely want to provide something for the whole community. And then there's a Slack, and I know Silent Trinity is on the Bloodhound Gang Slack. And then I put other things, kind of just have like data-driven decisions, because people ask me like, what's your favorite C2? And my answer is always it depends, because it really does depend. Like, what are you emulating? What are you trying to do? What are the business goals that you want to achieve here? What do you want to prove? Well, I want to prove that DNS over HTTPS is something we should disable. Well, then you go over here and you filter for DNS over HTTPS, which it's abbreviated DOH, and then there you can choose which one you use for that. And, you know, shout out to GoDo on that. So it really all depends, but added that information there as well. So that's C2 matrix. I put a couple of screenshots here on the presentation. If you went to my slideshare already, I took this screenshot today, so you have the most up-to-date info. And then the slingshot. So a lot of people have had trouble installing it. Some of these C2s have a lot of dependencies. So we went through and did that for you. You can get this free VM at sans.org. So with that all set up, then you emulate this adversary. Told you I want to give a shout out to Paul Poles, who has the unified kill chain. I really like the breakdown here of everything you have to do to gain that initial foothold. Once you have that foothold, then you do network propagation inside the internal network until you get to action on objectives. And this does map back out to attack. So for instance, initial access is a MITRE attack tactic. Command and control is a tactic. Persistence, defense evasion, discovery, privilege escalation, really everything in the network propagation part are MITRE tactics. And the only one that's not there is the new one from MITRE attack, which is impact. Impact is based on all the ransomware type of attacks and the destructive malware that you generally wouldn't do in a red team. And it wasn't out when Paul Poles wrote this paper, so that's probably the only one that's missing. I know I'm running short on time. I do want to have time for your Q&A. So let me just talk real quick about closure, because all the technical stuff is awesome, but you really need to show the value. And again, going back to that question on Twitter, if you're building this out, how do I get senior management support on this? Well, you have to show value. That means you have to measure. You have to come up with metrics. And yes, this is all things that senior managers care about. You want to know the time to contain, time to eradicate. It's just one of those things that senior managers read when they read that Verizon data breach report, like, oh my gosh, they were inside for X amount of days. Well, we've actually improved on that. The last time we did a red team, or 2 red team adversary emulations ago, it took them this long to find us. Now it took them this long. Look, it's improving. And I mentioned a shout out to Vector. This is also another tool that's available on the Slingshot. It's a free tool from the folks at Security Risk Advisor, and it's for planning and running red team and purple team exercises, right? Whether it's blind or non-blind. If it's blind, then you fill out the left part, which is the red team details. You create a test case. You can map that to MITRE attack and to the various kill chain phases. You could put what attacker tool you use, what source IP you use, when you started it, when you ended it, right? It actually forces you to take notes so that you can then measure this. If you did a blind test, then you work with the project manager or the exercise coordinator to get this information from the blue team. If you're doing a purple team exercise, then you will see this information on the blue team screens when they show you. Was that attack detected? Was there an alert on it? What was the severity of the alert, right? Because again, we're not talking about prevention. There is a field for blocked because there are some TTPs that are going to be blocked, but most of the TTPs are not going to be blocked, especially in a large network. You will have detection though, or you should tune detection. So was it logged? Yes, good. That's a good first step. Was there an alert? Yeah, but it was information on one side. All right, how can we get that to be more? Well, if we make this alert more important, then we're going to get flooded. All right, so when we need a tune, we need to do some sort of analytics. And through that, if you use my vector, then you can create these awesome graphs. So this here is actually an APT33 adversary emulation that we do in our 2-day red team course. We emulate APT33, and you do all these test cases, and not all of them are successful. So you put some that are blocked, some that are detected, but you can put this in that kill chain that senior managers understand. That way they know, oh, initial access, yeah, how did they get that? Wow, look at everything you did for command and control, or look at everything you had to try here. And then of course, we have heat maps. And heat maps are generally not green, especially the MITRE attack ones, but at least shows. And what I really like about this is you see the numbers next to some of the techniques. Those are different procedures. So you can actually see logon scripts. We did 2 test cases and it's orange. And then I saw a question about automated or BAS vendors. So breach and attack simulation is something relatively new. We started looking at this market about 2 years ago, and I actually looked at a whole bunch of them. I actually posted about it in this blog post, just some of the free and some of the commercial tools. but they do simulation, right? That's in the name, BAS, right? Breach and attack simulation. So it serves a purpose. It serves its control validation purpose. But we're a red team, and we're talking about automation and emulation, actually doing. So what happens with our tests is we find a whole bunch of issues that need to get fixed, and those things can't be fixed that fast, right? Like logging that something occurred on a number of Windows systems and showing up in a SOC panel takes a long time. So valid test case that this actually happened. We first had to work with engineers on the endpoint side to make sure that the right event log was actually triggering. Then we had to work and make sure that it was getting sent to the log correlation engine. Then we had to test and make sure that it was getting to the security analytics engine. Then we had to check that after all that, an alert was actually firing. For just the first one, we had to repeat that same attack about 8 times. Red team should not have to be repeating that same TTP, but at the same time, you want to emulate that TTP, right? And you don't want your red team wasting their time doing this. So throughout all of this, and I know this is a total vendor shout out, but it is the vendor we ended up going with, was Scythe. They are the ones that could do this the best in our opinion. And I just stole this little logo from them, or this little, how this works. And it's actually emulation. So again, BAS, and you want to talk about BAS, that is more of a blue team tool. Here, when a red team is asked to emulate something over and over, this is what we went with. We were able to create that same TTP and create an executable that they would just run it. So the person that was trying to get the logs going on Windows, he just went through and ran it over and over and over until it got working. Then to see if it was going over to log aggregation, they would run it on their own system. At this point, we're always controlling the C2. You're not having like some worm that's going around and going all crazy, but it's really allowed us to decouple. And my red team thanks me so much for this because we were doing the same thing over and over. So that's a shout out to them. Awesome product. And I will now take your questions.
Awesome. By the way, thank you for making C2 matrix, Jorge. I love that. It really does break it down really well, and it really does give a good way of categorizing what the TTPs of each tool can do and the thing you want to test for. So that really is an awesome project. Yeah.
Awesome,
so you got.
thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's
man.
do it. We got 8 minutes.
Well, actually 3 because we got.
All right, let's do it.
2
20
now.
seconds each.
Spitfire round. So, what was the tool's name again? I think it was called Vector, correct? That was the tool?
For planning, yes, Vector, VECTR.io.
Awesome. We got a question from GoToWebinar. Do you think it's more likely for the blue team to catch a large number of packets or larger packet size relating to C2?
Yeah, that's a volume question, and every organization is different. I can tell you ourselves, we have over 1 million IPs internally, and we could not capture that many packets. You have to do some sort of, a lot of massaging and engineering work.
Awesome. And we also had a question from Anon saying, any use cases for mobile IoT and devices? I'm assuming he's relating to C2s that target those platforms.
I did not add Android as one. I know Metasploit creates APKs. I don't know anyone else. Sorry, I didn't add that. We looked at Mac, Windows, and Linux.
Yeah, no worries. And another question from Discord: what about breach and attack simulation tools? Do you think these have any value, e.g., infection monkey no maps to MITRE attack?
Right. Yeah, and that's what I talked about in the in that adversary emulation. As their name suggests, they do simulation, right? Like infection monkey is one that I have on there, and it could serve its value, but it's we personally in our organization, just clear on that, did not find that to be valuable. Even some of the other BAS vendors were doing simulation, so they're repeating the same thing or replaying sort of attacks, and that's not really on the red team side. I mean, it has its its value for a blue team, but it's not ideal for us in red teaming. Like we want actual emulation, right? Like we actually want to do this stuff.
Awesome. Okay, and I think that's unfortunately all the time we have for questions. I'm sure Jorge can stick around a bit and answer some of the questions on Discord. So if you have any more questions, he'll be in the chat. And thank you again.
Thank
And
you.
yeah,
Sorry
just,
for running over.
oh no, you're fine. Actually perfectly timed here. Just a reminder, don't exit the GoTo meeting. I will boot you out
Okay.
manually. And thank you again, sir. See you around.
Thank you all.